Okay, so moving on with chapter 3. Real quickly, I wanted to review chapter 22. That's really just kind of a cute chapter on Tom Sawyer was sick for a little while, and by the time he by the time he was feeling better and was able to walk around and be normal again, he found there had been a revival in the village, and all of his friends, all his little friends, Ben Rogers and Jim Hollis and Huckleberry Finn, they've all turned into these ridiculously righteous and well-behaved gentlemen. And he finally gives up all hope when he goes to Huckleberry Finn and finds out that Huckleberry Finn is quoting scripture to him, like memorized Bible verses. And he's like, well, if Huckleberry Finn has, turned from bad to good, then there's no hope for anybody else. But by the end of the chapter, we see that Joe and Huck stole a melon, and they're enjoying eating it in the alley, kind of trying to hide their bad deeds. So Tom is encouraged once again that his friends really haven't changed that much. So today we're moving on to chapter 23, the salvation of Muff Potter. At last the sleepy atmosphere was stirred, and vigorously. The murder trial finally came on in the court. It became the absorbing topic of the village talk immediately. Tom could not get away from it. Every reference to the murder sent a shudder to his heart, for his troubled conscience and fears almost persuaded him that these remarks were put forth in his hearing as feelers. Basically, what this is talking about is he felt like because the town, everyone was talking about it, and he was super sensitive towards the topic because he's still keeping this massive secret about the murder. He feels like everyone is talking about it as a way to try and get information from him. Basically, he's just overly sensitive to the topic because he's so scared about it. He did not see how he could be suspected of knowing anything about the murder, but still he could not be comfortable in the midst of this gossip. It kept him in a cold shiver all the time. He took Huck to a lonely place to have a talk with him. It would be some relief to unseal his tongue for a little while, to divide his burden of distress with another sufferer. Moreover, he wanted to assure himself that Huck had remained discreet. Huck, have you ever told anybody about that? About what? Well, you know what. Oh, of course I haven't. Never a word? Never a solitary word, so help me. What makes you ask? Well, I was afeard. Why, Tom Sawyer, we wouldn't be alive 2 days if that got found out. You know that. Tom felt more comfortable. After a pause, Huck, they couldn't anybody get you to tell, could they? Get me to tell? Why, if I wanted that half-breed devil to drown me, they could get me to tell. They ain't no different way. Well, that's all right then. I reckon we're safe as long as we keep mum. But let's swear again anyway. It's more surer. Right, let me point out, obviously, surer is not a word. That just kind of shows how young these boys really are. Okay, well, I'm agreed. So they swore again with dread solemnities. Let me make sure I didn't skip a page here real quick. Okay, yeah. What is the talk around, Huck? I've heard a power of it. Talk? Well, it's just Muff Potter, Muff Potter, Muff Potter all the time. It keeps me in a sweat constant so's I want to hide somewheres. That's just the same way they go on around me. I reckon he's a goner. Don't you feel sorry for him sometimes? Oh, most always. Most always. He ain't no account. But then he ain't ever done anything to hurt anybody. Just fishes a little to get money to get drunk on and loafs around considerable. But Lord, we all do that. Leastways, most of us. Preachers and such like. But he's kind of good. He gave me half a fish once when there weren't enough for two. And lots of times he's kind of stood by me when I was out of luck. Okay, so they're talking about Muff Potter, and they're kind of I'm thinking back, he's really kind of a nice guy. One time he did this for me, and he's not like, doesn't really do anything great for the town, but he doesn't necessarily do anything bad either. And Tom says, well, he's mended kites for me, Huck, and knitted hooks onto my line. I wish we could get him out of there. Ma! We can't get him out, Tom. And besides, 'twouldn't do any good. They'd just catch him again. Yeah, so they would. But I hate to hear him abuse him so, like the Dickens, whenever he never done, you know, that. Tom says, I hate to hear him talk so bad about him when really we know he's innocent. Well, I do too, Tom. Lord, I hear him say he is the bloodiest looking villain in this country, and they wonder he wasn't ever hung before. Yes, they all talk like that all the time. I heard him say that if he was to get free, they'd lynch him. Basically, they'd kill him. And they'd do it too. The boys had a long talk, but it brought them little comfort. As the twilight drew on, they found themselves hanging about the neighborhood of the little isolated jail, perhaps with an undefined hope that something would happen that might clear away the difficulties. But nothing happened. There seemed to be no angels or fairies interested in this luckless captive. The boys did as they had often done before. They went to the cell grating and gave Potter some tobacco and matches. He was on the ground floor and there were no guards. Okay, so this is showing us that every once in a while, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn would go to the jail to visit Muff Potter, and they would bring him gifts, basically, things that he couldn't get access to. So they'd bring him tobacco, they'd bring him matches, they'd bring him maybe like some food sometimes or some snacks, things like that. Just honestly, in a way to kind of ease their conscience and make them feel better about not being able to tell the truth and actually set him free. They're going to at least try and make his stay in jail a little bit more tolerable. So then down here it says his gratitude, talking about Muff Potter. Muff Potter's gratitude for their gifts had always smote their consciences before, but it cut deeper than ever this time. So that word smote right there means it kind of like it struck their conscience. It was like he was so thankful. He'd say, oh, thank you boys so much. Y'all are so nice. And on the inside, they would actually feel kind of guilty because they knew that they could do more to set him free. They're just too scared to. They felt cowardly and treacherous to the last degree when Potter said, you've been mighty good to me, boys, better than anybody else in this town. And I don't forget it, I don't. Often I says to myself, says I used to mend all the boys' cats and things and show 'em where the good fishing places was and even befriend 'em when I could. And now they've all forgot old Muff when he's in trouble. But Tom don't, and Huck don't. No, they don't forget him, says I, and I don't forget them. Well, boys, I done an awful thing. Drunk and crazy at the time. That's the only way I can account for it. And now I gotta swing for it, and it's right. Right and best, too, I reckon. Well, I hope so anyway. Well, we won't talk about that. I don't want to make you feel bad because you've befriended me. But I want to say is, don't you ever get drunk. Then you won't ever get here. Stand a little further west. Oh, yeah, that's it. It's a prime comfort to see faces that friendly when a body's in such a muck of trouble, and there don't none come here but yourn. Good, friendly faces. Good, friendly faces. Yeah, get up on one another's backs and let me touch 'em. That's it. Shake hands. Yourn will come through the bars and mine's too big. Oh, little hands and weak, but they've helped Muff Potter a power, and they'd help him more if they could. Okay, so this whole paragraph is Muff Potter telling Tom and Huck, you guys have been so nice to me. It's such a comfort to see you. No one ever comes to visit me in jail, but you guys, I feel great. You guys just make my day. Don't you ever drink and get yourselves in my position. Don't you ever, get drunk and kill somebody. Then you'll be in my position and it's just not worth it. Take care of yourselves. All these things that make the boys feel it should make them feel great, right? He's being super nice to them, saying super complimentary things. But they feel guilty because they know there's more they could be doing to help him. They're just too afraid to tell the truth. Tom went home miserable, and his dreams that night were full of horrors. The next day and the day after, he hung about the courtroom, drawn by an almost irresistible impulse to go in, but forcing himself to stay out. Huck was having the same experience. They studiously avoided each other. Each of them wandered away from time to time, but the same dismal fascination always brought them back presently. Tom kept his ears open when idlers sauntered out of the courtroom, but invariably heard distressing news. The toils were closing more and more relentlessly around poor Potter. So basically, Tom and Joe are kind of hanging out around the courtroom as the trial's going on because they want to know what the verdict is. And it's not looking good. It looks like poor Potter is going to be convicted of murder. At the end of the second day, the village talk was to the effect that Injun Joe's evidence stood firm and unshaken, and that there was not the slightest question as to what the jury's verdict would be. Tom was out late that night and came to bed through the window. He was in a tremendous state of excitement. It was hours before he got to sleep. All the village flocked to the courthouse the next morning, for this was to be the great day. Both sexes were about equally represented in the packed audience, meaning there were both males and females in the audience. After a long wait, the jury filed in and took their places. Shortly afterward, Potter, pale and haggard, timid and hopeless, was brought in with chains upon him and seated where all the curious eyes could stare at him. No less conspicuous was Injun Joe, as stolid as ever. Basically, stolid means like kind of stone-faced. So where Muff Potter was showing great fear and hopelessness, pretty much convinced he was going to be going to jail and convicted of murder, Injun Joe had this stone face on. Okay, no feeling, no emotion. Remember, he's just a witness. He is there to share what he saw about the murder, and he's basically sharing information that's going to frame Muff Potter for murder. But he's showing no emotion whatsoever. There was another pause, and then the judge arrived, and the sheriff proclaimed the opening of the court. The usual whisperings among the lawyers and gathering together of papers followed. These details and accompanying delays worked up an atmosphere of preparation that was as impressive as it was fascinating. Now, a witness was called who testified that he found Muff Potter washing in the brook at an early hour of the morning that the murder was discovered, and that he immediately sneaked away. After some further questioning, counsel for the prosecution said, "Take the witness." The prisoner raised his eyes for a moment, but dropped them again when his own counsel said, "I have no questions to ask him." Basically, I can't ask him any questions that would help my client look innocent. The next witness proved the finding of the knife near the corpse. Counsel for the prosecution said, "Take the witness." "I have no questions to ask him," Potter's lawyer replied. A third witness swore he had often seen the knife in Potter's possession. "Take the witness." Counsel for Potter declined to question him. The faces of the audience began to betray annoyance. Did this attorney mean to throw away his client's life without an effort? Okay, so every time that the prosecution says take the witness, they're giving Potter's lawyer a chance to question the witness and try to make Potter look innocent. But every time the lawyer says, "No, I'm good." So it's almost like he's not even putting up a fight for Potter's innocence. Several witnesses deposed concerning Potter's guilty behavior when brought to the scene of the murder. They were allowed to leave the stand without being cross-questioned. So again, his lawyer said, "No, I'm good." Every detail of the damaging circumstances that occurred in the graveyard upon that morning, which all present remembered so well, was brought out by credible witnesses, but none of them were cross-examined by Potter's lawyer. The perplexity and dissatisfaction of the House expressed itself in murmurs and provoked a reproof from the bench. Basically meaning the judge, hit his gavel and said, "Order! Order in the court! Quiet! Quiet!" Counsel for the prosecution now said, "By the oaths of citizens whose simple word is above suspicion, we have fastened this awful crime, beyond all possibility of question, upon the unhappy prisoner at the bar. We rest our case here." A groan escaped from poor Potter, and he put his face in his hands and rocked his body softly to and fro. while a painful silence reigned in the courtroom. Many men were moved, and many women's compassion testified itself in tears. Counsel for the defense rose and said, "Your Honor, in our remarks at the opening of this trial, we foreshadowed our purpose to prove that our client did this fearful deed while under the influence of a blind and irresponsible delirium produced by drink or alcohol. We have changed our mind. We shall not offer that plea." Then to the clerk, "Call Thomas Sawyer." A puzzled amazement awoke in every face in the house, not even excepting Potter's. Every eye fastened itself with wondering interest upon Tom as he rose and took his place upon the stand. The boy looked wild enough, for he was badly scared. The oath was administered. So basically, the lawyer for who's defending Potter now says, "We'd like to call Thomas Sawyer to the stand as a witness." Tom Sawyer marches up the aisle. He's put on the witness stand. He's sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And now the trial progresses. "Thomas Sawyer, where were you on the 17th of June, about the hour of midnight?" Tom glanced at Injun Joe's iron face, and his tongue failed him. Basically, he freaked out. The audience listened breathless, but the words refused to come. After a few moments, however, the boy got a little of his strength back and managed to put enough of it into his voice to make part of the house hear, "In the graveyard." "A little bit louder, please. Don't be afraid. You were in the graveyard." A contemptuous smile flitted across Injun Joe's face. "Were you anywhere near Horace Williams' grave?" "Yes, sir." "Speak up, just a trifle louder. How near were you?" Near as I am to you." "Were you hidden or not?" "I was hid." "Where?" "Behind the elms on the edge of the grave." Injun Joe gave a barely perceptible start, almost like he's stunned, like, are you kidding me?" "Was anyone with you?" "Yes, sir. I went there with—" Wait a moment. Never mind mentioning your companion's name. We will produce him at the proper time. Did you carry anything there with you?" Tom hesitated and looked confused. "Speak out, my boy. Don't be diffident. The truth is always respectable. What did you take there?" "Only a, a dead cat." There was a ripple of mirth, which the court checked. Basically, the audience kind of laughed a little bit, like, of course this boy would take a dead cat to a graveyard. "We will produce the skeleton of that cat. Now, my boy, tell us everything that occurred. Tell it in your own way. Don't skip anything, and don't be afraid." Tom began, hesitatingly at first, but as he warmed to his subject, his words flowed more and more easily. In a little while, every sound ceased but his own voice. Every eye fixed itself upon him. With parted lips and bated breath, the audience hung upon his words, taking no note of time, wrapped in the ghastly fascinations of the tale. The strain upon pent emotion reached its climax when the boy said, "And as the doctor fetched the board round and Muff Potter fell, Injun Joe jumped with the knife and crash!" Quick as lightning, the half-breed, which we know as Injun Joe, sprang for a window, tore his way through all opposers, and was gone. So, right as Tom got to the part about Injun Joe stabbing the doctor with the knife and then putting it into Muff Potter's hand, Injun Joe jumped out of the window and ran through all the opposers and ran away, clearly looking very guilty. Chapter 24.